Graveyard Spirits. In the quiet town of Willowbrook, nestled amidst the embrace of an ancient forest, there stood a graveyard that whispered of long-forgotten secrets. The town was a quaint, peaceful place, its cobblestone streets winding their way through a landscape that seemed untouched by time. But lurking at the edge of the town was the graveyard, an ominous presence that cast a shadow over the otherwise serene surroundings. The graveyard was old, older than anyone in Willowbrook could remember. The tombstones, weathered and worn, bore inscriptions that had faded with the passage of centuries. Local legends spoke of the graveyard's dark history, tales of restless spirits and vengeful ghosts that haunted the night. Despite these ominous stories, most of the townsfolk dismissed them as mere superstitions, refusing to believe in the supernatural. However, there were those, like Sarah, who couldn't resist the lure of the unknown. Sarah was a young girl with a fascination for the supernatural, a curiosity that often led her to explore the mysteries of the world beyond. Her friends, Mark, Emily, and Jake, were both intrigued and apprehensive about Sarah's obsession with the occult. One chilly autumn evening, curiosity got the better of them, and they decided to venture into the heart of the forest to uncover the truth behind the graveyard's legends. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the moon ascended into the night sky, the group of friends made their way towards the graveyard. The air grew chilly, and an inexplicable sense of foreboding settled over them. Sarah, undeterred by the eerie atmosphere, led the way, her flashlight cutting through the darkness like a beacon of light. Upon reaching the graveyard, Sarah wasted no time. With a determined glint in her eyes, she pulled out an ancient book she had found in her grandmother's attic. Its pages were yellowed with age, and its text was written in a language long forgotten. Sarah, however, seemed to understand the arcane symbols and incantations within the book. Ignoring her friend's cautious warnings, Sarah began to chant the incantation, her voice trembling slightly as she uttered the words. The atmosphere changed almost immediately. The ground beneath them seemed to tremble, as if in response to the ancient incantation. The tombstones around them glowed with an otherworldly light, illuminating the graveyard in an eerie, ghostly glow. A cold wind swept through the graveyard, extinguishing the lanterns the friends had brought with them. The graveyard was plunged into darkness, except for the faint glow emanating from the tombstones. Mark, Emily, and Jake huddled close to Sarah, their hearts pounding in their chests as an inexplicable fear settled over them. Whispers, like the rustling of leaves on a windy night, filled the air. The whispers grew louder, morphing into distinct voices that seemed to come from all directions. The spirits of the graveyard had awakened, and they were not pleased with the intrusion. Shadowy figures began to materialize in the darkness, their forms twisted and contorted. Hollow eyes glowed with malevolence as the spirits closed in on the terrified friends. Cold fingers brushed against their skin, sending shivers down their spines. Sarah tried to speak, to utter a counter-incantation, but her voice was drowned out by the ghostly wails that filled the air. The spirits grew bolder, their ghostly forms coalescing into solid, malevolent entities. They reached out with spectral hands, grabbing hold of the terrified teenagers. Mark and Emily screamed as they were lifted off their feet, their bodies writhing in the grip of unseen forces. Jake, paralyzed with fear, could only watch in horror as his friends were pulled away from him, their cries echoing in the night. The following morning, the sun rose over Willowbrook, casting its warm golden light over the town. The townsfolk went about their daily routines, unaware of the horror that had befallen the young adventurers. It was only when their absence became noticeable that concern began to spread through the town. A search party was organized, and the townsfolk ventured into the forest, hoping to find some trace of the missing teenagers. As they approached the graveyard, a sense of dread settled over them. The tombstones stood silent, their eerie glow fading with the light of dawn. There was no sign of the adventurous teenagers, no trace of their presence except for the open book lying amidst the graves. The town was overcome with grief and fear. The once curious teenagers had paid the ultimate price for their curiosity, becoming a cautionary tale that would be passed down through generations. The legend of the graveyard grew even darker after that fateful night. The townsfolk avoided the cemetery, fearing the wrath of the vengeful spirits that dwelled within its ancient grounds. And so, the ancient graveyard stood in solemn silence, its secrets buried deep within the earth, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to awaken the restless spirits that called it home. The town of Willowbrook would never forget the horror that had befallen their youth, a chilling reminder of the darkness that lurked beneath the surface of the world, waiting to consume the unwary and the foolish. The once curious teenagers had become a permanent part of the graveyard's legends, their fate serving as a haunting reminder to all who dared to venture into the unknown. Next is the story of the haunting fair. In the quiet town Kidlington, situated at the foothills and dense forests, there stood an old cemetery known as Whispering Pines. The village, though charming, was shrouded in a veil of eerie silence after sundown. Among the villagers, there circulated dark tales of the cemetery being haunted, whispers of lost souls and restless spirits. In this village, we meet our protagonist, Tom, a middle-aged taxi driver. Despite the village's spooky reputation, he was a pragmatic man, never one to easily succumb to superstitions. One chilly autumn night, the wind howled through the narrow village streets, carrying with it a sense of foreboding. Tom received a mysterious call from a soft-spoken woman, requesting a ride to Whispering Pines Cemetery. Intrigued and somewhat apprehensive, he agreed to pick her up. As he approached the outskirts of the village, he saw a young woman, pale as moonlight, standing by the roadside. Dressed in a flowing white gown that seemed to blend with the mist, she looked ethereal and out of place. Without uttering a word, she entered the taxi, her eyes hollow and distant. Tom, suppressing his unease, started the engine and began the journey towards the cemetery. The village roads grew narrower as they ventured deeper into the forest, the ancient trees casting eerie shadows that danced with every flicker of the headlights. The atmosphere inside the taxi grew tense, the silence broken only by the occasional creaking of the vehicle and the rustling of leaves outside. Tom's grip on the steering wheel tightened as the cemetery gates loomed ahead, the wrought iron appearing like skeletal fingers reaching out from the darkness. Upon reaching the cemetery gates, the woman requested Tom to wait for her. With a sense of trepidation, he watched her disappear into the graveyard, her figure slowly vanishing into the misty night. Minutes turned into an hour, and Tom grew increasingly anxious. He decided to investigate, fearing that something might have happened to the mysterious passenger. The cemetery was engulfed in an eerie silence, broken only by the distant hoots of owls and the occasional rustle of nocturnal creatures. Tom, armed with a flashlight, ventured into the cemetery, calling out for the woman. His voice seemed to be swallowed by the darkness, the only response being the echo of his own words. As he approached a crumbling mausoleum, he heard faint whispers carried by the wind. The voices seemed to come from the graves themselves, telling tales of sorrow and despair. To his horror, Tom found the woman standing before an ancient crypt, her form glowing faintly in the moonlight. Her eyes, once hollow, were now filled with a sorrowful intensity. She introduced herself as Eliza, a soul trapped between realms, cursed to wander the cemetery for eternity. She pleaded with Tom for help, explaining that a malevolent spirit had bound her to the graveyard, preventing her from finding peace. Tom, despite his fear, felt a surge of empathy for Eliza. He agreed to assist her in breaking the curse that bound her. Guided by Eliza's ethereal presence, he embarked on a quest to unravel the mystery behind the curse. Together, they delved into ancient texts and performed rituals under the guidance of long-forgotten incantations. Tom's skepticism wavered as he witnessed Eliza's desperation, her spirit flickering like a candle in the wind. As they delved deeper into the heart of the cemetery, the malevolent spirits awakened by their presence grew more aggressive. Tom and Eliza encountered vengeful apparitions, their ghastly forms flickering in the darkness. The air was thick with the scent of decay and the sound of mournful wails, and Tom could feel the weight of the supernatural forces pressing down on him. After a series of harrowing encounters and ancient rituals, they reached the center of the cemetery, a forgotten shrine dedicated to an unknown deity. Eliza, her form flickering and translucent, guided Tom through the final ritual. Together, they chanted words in a long-forgotten language, their voices resonating through the night. With each incantation, the ground trembled, and the shrine glowed with an otherworldly light. In a blinding flash, the curse binding Eliza was broken. The malevolent spirits that had tormented her were banished, their anguished cries fading into the distance. Eliza's spectral form began to glow, her features softening as a sense of peace washed over her. With a smile, she thanked Tom, her voice fading like a distant whisper. Tom, left alone in the cemetery, felt a mix of emotions, fear, awe, and a strange sense of accomplishment. As he made his way back to the taxi, he couldn't shake off the feeling that he had experienced something extraordinary. The village of Kidlington, once veiled in darkness, felt different to him now, as if the spirits that had haunted the cemetery had finally found their rest. As he drove away from Whispering Pines Cemetery, Tom couldn't help but wonder about the mysteries of the supernatural world. The encounter with Eliza would stay with him forever, a tale he would share with others, reminding them that in the depths of fear, there could be compassion, and in the face of the unknown, there could be understanding. And thus, the story of the taxi driver who encountered a ghost in the haunted village of Kidlington became a legend, whispered through the generations, a testament to the inexplicable bond between the living and the dead.